Welcome to our new program, American Pulse. My name is Michael Morgan. I'm an Egyptian-born American doctor. We have this American Pulse program because we want to clarify the situation between the Egyptian community and the American society. We want to have a better understanding for better Egypt. Hi, Lama.
Hi, Morgan. This is Lama Ali. Today, our guest is Judith Miller.
Welcome to our program. Ms. Miller, tell us about yourself.
Well, I have a long-standing connection to Egypt in that I started going in 1971. That was my first trip. And I was the Cairo bureau chief of the New York Times between 1983 and 1986. And I have been going back to Egypt every year since then, just about every year. And I was in Tahrir Square during the revolution.
Which one?
Right, the first one. And then I was in Tahrir Square again 3 months before the second revolution.
Oh, wow.
So I have, and I just returned last month from another week-long trip in which I was privileged to see many of the people who may be running the next government.
Very interesting. Before we get into that, if you, we now know that you're working for the Council of Foreign Relations.
No, I'm an adjunct fellow at the Manhattan Institute.
Okay.
I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay.
And I go to their sessions, but I work here, and I'm a contributor to Fox News, and I write frequently for the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, and other op-ed pages of American papers, opinion pieces.
Very good. But it seems like you have a very extensive knowledge about the Middle East.
I have been covering the Middle East for roughly 30 years, and I think that one of the problems is that because Americans have been exposed to at least 2 wars in the Middle East in the past 30 years, they think they know a lot about the Middle East, but actually they don't. And they've gotten perhaps the wrong impression, because what we do know is roughly wars that involve Arab countries, and of course the Middle East is not about wars all the time.
I know.
So, Ms. Miller, from your perspective, tell us how you see the evolution of Egyptian-American relations over the past several years, please.
I think that we are now in a very bad place in terms of U.S.-Egyptian relations. It's one of the worst periods I can remember since Nasser, which is saying a lot. And I think that there is a fundamental miscommunication and misunderstanding between the two governments now, and a set of unrealistic expectations on the part of my government, a lack of appreciation of what's happened in Egypt in the past 2 years, and a misunderstanding of what's politically possible and economically desirable in that country on the part of my government. There have been mistakes on both sides, miscommunication on both sides, but I think it's very, very important for the future of Egypt and for the future of our relations, that U.S.-Egyptian relations, that Americans have some strategic patience with the process that's now unfolding in Egypt and is going to culminate in I think, a transition to something new and different, beginning with the elections.
What do you see as the most critical juncture for the relationship? Is the Arab Spring or Morsi ouster?
I think they were both important. They were both events were important to Egyptians and important to Americans, but poorly understood here. I think it was impossible, and I was in Tahrir Square during that period, not to be overwhelmed by the outpouring of yearning for freedom and justice and a change, and for an end to a system that had outlived its usefulness in Egypt.
You felt it right there.
It was impossible not to feel. You had to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to understand what a historic event this was and how important it was. And one that, by the way, most Egyptologists and people who studied Egypt, most people who studied the Middle East completely missed, did not predict, including me. I wrote a book in 1996 called God Has 99 Names, reporting from a militant Middle East, which predicted that Egypt would never experience a revolution because its people were too accepting of authority and told too many good jokes about the ruler. And in that way, they diffused the long list of grievances that they had against the system and against the government. And also because of Egyptian history. Egyptian history is one of pretty much centralized autocratic rule, and I thought that culturally Egyptians were comfortable with that system. And even I misjudged, though I went back every year, I misjudged this yearning for, I'm not going to use the word democracy, but justice and fairness and change. And I think after Tahrir, perhaps most of us were a little too optimistic about how fast that change could come about and what it would bring and what form it would take.
Did you ever expect another quick revolution?
Well, I
After
was,
that first great one?
after my first, after Tahrir, I came back and I wrote a piece for Manhattan Institute's City Journal about the thrill of the revolution and the danger of the revolution. And I said at the end of this piece about the importance of the square in modern political life. I wrote that my concern was that the only really well-organized party in Egypt was the Muslim Brotherhood, and that I feared they would benefit disproportionately from the revolution that had occurred. And in fact, that is what happened. My concern was that in part because President Mubarak did not want to see a secular alternative to his rule, he tended to suppress secular moderate voices that could be an alternative. So the only party which was there, organized, well-resourced, well-financed, was the Brotherhood. And we saw that play out in the election. But even so, Morsi only won by 51.7% of the vote. And if you put all of the secular parties together and the number of people who voted for them, you could clearly see that the will of the Egyptian people did not favor an Islamist Iranian-style regime or even Turkish regime for Egypt. It wanted change, but it didn't want Islamism and that kind of change. But given the weakness of the civil institutions and the inability of the young organizers to form coherent political parties that could get the vote out, the Muslim Brotherhood benefited. So I returned twice in between those two periods, and I saw the gradual erosion of support for President Morsi. I saw the mistakes he made, one after another after another, a lot of mistakes. I saw the frustration of the Egyptian people, and particularly many of those who had voted for him, grow day by day without a real response from President Morsi. And so to me, the second revolution was as surprising, as astonishing, as dramatic and important as the first. And I remember being in Egypt, in Cairo, roughly 3 months before that event occurred, and everyone at that point, from people who supported the military and had wanted alternative candidates, to Ahmed Maher say, only the military can save us. There was such a strong consensus that I came back and I wrote that certainly a takeover was likely by the military and would be supported by the people if Morsi didn't understand that he had to change.
But that takes me to my next question, where the Muslim Brotherhood maintained June 30th, 2013 demonstration as a coup. They called it as a coup. What do you think about that?
It was technically a military coup. But it was a military coup brought about by the overwhelming demand. Well, I call it a popular coup. I call it something I had never seen before, which is if 4 to 5 million people in Tahrir Square were responsible for prompting the first Egyptian revolution, 33 million people who turned out in the streets of almost every city in Egypt were responsible for bringing about the second popular revolution, or what our government came close to calling but did not call a military coup. Even to this day, the United States has not formally designated what happened in Egypt in June a military coup, for which I am very grateful. We may have gotten a lot of things wrong about what's happened in Egypt, but that at least was understood.
Egypt is heading now for its first presidential election, and I don't know if you're aware.
Not the first. We had several under President
Yeah, after June 30th revolution, which is the most outrageous revolution. General Sisi, you mentioned that you met with him.
Yes, I did.
So he's heavily favored to win this election. Yes. A lot of people like this man. So what do you think of this guy?
It was very hard for me to judge him in only an hour. I had never met him before. I think he made it clear to me that he had not, and the small group that who met with him, that he had not sought this job. He didn't wake up every morning and say, I want to rule Egypt.
They pushed him to do it, right?
that he felt he was responding to the needs of the people. I think he's a patriot. He's clearly a man who is deeply concerned about not only the military challenges facing the country, but I think the biggest challenge, which is economic at this point. My concern about him is he capable of, does he understand the need to adopt, and is he capable of adopting, moving Egypt towards a new stage, what I call the third way, and Amr Moussa has also called it the third way, and that is, it would be disastrous for Egypt to return to the military, quasi-military rule of before, but we also know that what came after quasi-military rule, which was Muslim Brotherhood rule, was also a disaster. So can Egypt, under President Sisi, find this third way, which provides strong leadership, but still permits voices of dissent, opposition parties, opposition voices to be heard and accepted and to flourish? I don't know that. I don't know if that's in his DNA yet. We will find out.
It's funny, one of my friends is telling me that you guys Egyptian people don't have a manual. We don't predict what you're going to do. We don't know what's going to happen there.
No one has a manual for this. Look, Egypt is a rich country and it's a poor country. Half of its people, as we know, now live under the poverty line. Right. But we also know that Egyptians are rich in skills and talent, and they are all over the Arab world. They are all over the world. There are 8 million Egyptians outside of Egypt at the moment. But how does one rule a country of 94 million people as of March, which is adding 1 million people every 9 months to its population? How do you possibly grow the economy, provide enough jobs for all the new young people entering the workforce? How do you do that and maintain social cohesion, dynamic leadership? There is no roadmap for this. Egypt, I think, once again will be forced to provide a new way.
So you have a feeling it's going to happen?
I don't know. I certainly, as somebody who can't imagine not returning to Egypt every year, I want it to happen. I want Egypt to succeed. I want the world to see the Egypt that
we have a lot of resources there, a lot of temples.
I always thought when I lived there and I visited that Egypt was actually an under-visited country. 60 million people used to visit Spain each year, and I love Spain, but it can't offer half of what Egypt can offer. with the way of cultural tourism. Also, by the way, cultural tourism is far more lucrative and beneficial for an economy than what they call sun and surf tourism. So, you know, first of all, they can go to Egypt. Second of all, we can maintain military and economic assistance to Egypt in this vital period when Egypt is in a transition to something. Three, we can be less judgmental and have a little more strategic patience with a country which is feeling its way along a path that is uncharted and unknown.
My final question to you. President Obama said at one point that Egypt must stop blaming America for the problems and look internally. Do you agree to that?
To a certain extent, that's fair. I mean, all of us like to blame outsiders for our problems. That's always easiest. It's always easier. There's a lot of misunderstanding in Egypt about what President Obama has done. You know, the immediate our first response, which was to cut off some forms of aid, which should, in my view, not have been cut off, but are now misunderstood by Egyptians. We will not stop criticizing violations of human rights, putting journalists in jail. The other things that we see as wrong that the transition government has done, we hope to see these mistakes not repeated. I think they are mistakes. And we will not start speaking out about that. On the other hand, I think President Obama can, and I hope will do more to let the Egyptian people know that despite our differences, we are allies. We have been allies. Egypt was the first country to make peace with Israel. It has always been a leader for a moderation. It has stood for moderation. It has led the Arab world. And I hope to see it restored to that natural position of leadership. And I hope that our president will make clear that Egypt is important to the United States. And vice versa.
I hope so. All right. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I think a revolution happened in Egypt called an Arab Spring. I think that people were fed up with the government coming down on them hard, you know, taking all the, you know, too heavy on taxes and everything. I think Egypt has a very good future. They create jobs for people, make more money, you know, and make things better for people. They can get more food, more education.
I believe that being an Egyptian American, it's definitely important to know what's going on in Egypt. The past year or so, it has been a revolution. If people don't like what they have, they're going to revolt against their government, and that's what the Egyptian people did. They took down Mubarak. They believed that Morsi did not give them what they wanted. There were a lot of people in poverty, and so now they want to build a new democracy. They want to be the ones in charge of the voting and create a new system. And being an Egyptian, I feel like I have the power, and I believe that I have the vote to change things, not just being here, but going down to Egypt myself and spreading the word and being a part of the Egyptian community. I really want to believe that the American system is helping Egypt, but with the media and everything we see on TV, we feel like it's all fake, you know? When I speak to my family in Egypt, they tell me one thing, and what I see on TV, it's completely different. So I feel like if we really get the eye news and the eye view of what's really going on in Egypt, we'll be able to know the facts and the truth, and not just the myth. My hope for the new election and the presidency that's coming up in Egypt is for people to really know what they want. And what they really want is what's going to change Egypt as a whole. And we're all family at the end, and we all want one thing, and that's peace. And we want everyone to have a home, and we want less poverty, and we want everyone to be a family and to come together as one, because in the end we're all Muslimin, we're all Egyptian.